A while back, a long while back at this point, I did a video on win states. It was one of those barely researched but nevertheless theory-heavy videos that had me inventing game design terms and vocabulary from thin air because, hey, who else was going to do it? Someone who isn't a 26-year-old white guy with no experience in game development or academia? Pfft, I got this. In the video, I mentioned what I called at the time Boolean win states, which I define as a win state, or fail state for that matter, that could either be true or false. You reach it or you don't. This was in opposition to what I proposed were more complicated and ambiguous win and fail states, like high score rankings that aren't absolute wins or absolute losses, or the way a game can imply a game state is desirable through metaphor, like collecting coins or other items that don't really do anything in the system. And while looking at the way games ask players to push game systems towards or away from certain states is interesting, and there's a lot of edge cases we could talk about that pose all sorts of engaging questions, most games focus on that standard win-loss approach. Complete the story, or collect the most points, or be the last one standing by the end of the match, and you win. Lose all your health, or let the timer run out, or fail your objective, and you lose. Try again.
I'll send you back as often as it takes.
And lately I've been thinking a lot about how these win states make it difficult for games to engage with the real world. Or, more specifically, how this rigid model of wins and losses fails to represent life. Because life is messy and ugly and complicated. Games, like Sith, deal in absolutes. You win or you lose. You make progress in the story, or you die and have to start over. You get more points than the other team and are victorious, or you're a loser. More often than not, the things you do in games get chalked up to either an achievement worth celebrating, or a failure to be ashamed of. Games with win states suck at dealing with mediocrity, disappointment, an unexpected twist, or even just an outcome more complicated than good or bad. It's why the only real subversion of the form is, what if the good thing were a bad thing? But life isn't that simple. Most of the things we do are just the things we do. Shopping for groceries isn't a win, and getting some cavities filled at the dentist isn't a loss. Trying to look at them in that light sort of imposes a framework of value judgments that simply shouldn't be there. And that goes for the things you create as well. For example, with the benefit of almost a decade of hindsight on that video, I realize I should have called them binary win states, not Boolean win states. Because Boolean, as an adjective, means relating to logical algebra, like using ands and ors logical math to determine if a thing is true. And binary means dealing with just two things. And this is why you do not let YouTubers invent game design terms. And combined with the fact that I did no real research for that old video and can cite no sources, does this mean that that video was kind of a failure? In being actively flawed, or even simply imperfect, does it need to be scrubbed away and counted as a loss in my ledger? Or is there value in ideas expressed even awkwardly or incorrectly? Is it enough to get people thinking about games and how win states and loss states impact play? Even outside of its value as a video to be consumed by an audience, is its existence validated as a stepping stone in my own growth as a video editor, critic, whatever? The answer, I think, is both. It is an old video made by a kid who didn't know what he was doing, with terrible production values, and it gets a lot wrong. But it also may have sparked some interesting conversations between friends about how games are designed, and it helped me become better at this whole whatever this thing is I do. It's not a terrible failure, and it's not some unassailable triumph. It's a thing I did. Almost a decade ago. Sometime in June of 2011, I uploaded a grainy video of myself yelling into a webcam about Deus Ex Invisible War, of all things, to the now-defunct video service Blip.tv. I don't know the exact day in June because that website and all of its records were lost after they were sold to Maker, and then Maker sold to Disney, and the whole thing was shut down because Disney remains bad at interactive media. But the point is, 10 years ago in June, I started doing Errant Signal. And I've kind of had this date hanging over me for a while now. It's loomed off in the distance for months. Do I do a celebration video? A Q&A? Do I just let it pass quietly? And now that it's here, I'm not sure how to process it. So I'll do what I always do. Overanalyze my response to the thing, then turn those thoughts into hashtag content, because the internet has killed my ability to process my emotions without having the experience validated by an audience. This anniversary has been so imposing to me because 10 years is a long time. I've been doing this show longer than I was a college student and a high school student combined. I've been doing this show longer than I've been married. Since 2011, I've had 3 different day jobs, had to say goodbye to 3 dogs, and changed addresses twice. I did a video early in my career where I said I'd never really experienced depression, and then I got depressed. I mentioned in a video how no one I knew had ever had cancer, and then that summer, my mom got cancer. My life has changed repeatedly and profoundly over the past 10 years, but this show, this one thing, has been a constant. And if I'm being completely honest, it really hasn't gone the way I thought it would. Like, I'm a childless 36-year-old who makes YouTube videos about video games in his spare time. With each passing year, that starts to feel a little less like, cool hobby, my guy, and a little more, oh, that's sad. Especially if you step back and look at other YouTube channels that have recently celebrated 10 years, like Red Letter Media and Game Theory and more, that support multiple full-time creators across millions of subscribers and views, and I'm back here struggling to make 1 video a month and recently failing at that. But hey, Social Blade says I'll hit 200k around October of 2023, so stay tuned for that Q&A special. Now, there are going to be people that say this video is just complaining about a lack of subscribers or whatever, but they're going to say that no matter what, so screw them. That's not really what I'm here to talk about. I cherish every subscriber and every random viewer this channel has, and the fact that anyone would watch any of my nonsense rambling is humbling. I am an idiot who fails to enunciate his words half the time, and the fact that you put up with me is incredibly gracious on your part. When I say the channel hasn't gone the way I thought it would, I mean that when I started it 10 years ago as a naive 26-year-old kid, I really believed I could do the YouTube thing full-time at some point in the future. You know, put in my dues, invest in production values, learn new skills like After Effects, buy a better mic setup, get better at snappy editing, and over time improve my writing and delivery, and in 5 or maybe 10 years, I'd be living the dream doing this full-time. It was some real, if you build it, they will come thinking. And obviously, for a variety of reasons too long to get into now, that clearly didn't happen. But despite that, there's still a part of me that keeps thinking this is the before part of the show's history, where I'm putting in my dues, and at some point a critical mass will kick in, or a video will randomly go viral, and I'll finally get there. I'll arrive. I'll have validation and the ability to work on this show full time, and my output will spike in volume and in quality, and it'll get even better, and it won't be just some weird hobby I do, it'll be my job, and I'll have a peer group of video creators who respect and know my work just as I respect and know theirs, and I just gotta keep hustling till that day arrives, and it's taken me a decade to realize it, but that's not gonna happen. At this point, I'm almost certainly never going to be able to go full-time with Errant Signal. It's just not feasible. The content I produce and the rate at which I produce it don't jive with YouTube's algorithms, and honestly, there's not as big an audience as you might think for games criticism, especially of smaller games. And that is why the 10-year anniversary has bothered me so much as it's grown ever closer. It's not that I'm afraid of getting old, or the show aging, or the world changing around me. It's that I have to kind of face the fact that this is not some hypothetical before time where I train to be the video essayists I will eventually become. This is it. This is Errant Signal. We're 10 years in now. The show is not waiting to bloom. There is no next part where content production ramps up and everything gets taken to the next level. There is no job or community or validation waiting for me on the other side of some hypothetical horizon. And to bring this back to the original point of the video, that realization makes it hard not to feel like I failed. I had a goal, an objective, and I failed to achieve it. In games, that's a fail state. I lost. And it's been hard to reckon with that. This feeling that the show isn't what it should be by now, and therefore it's bad or a failure. But the point of this video isn't to whine about failure. The point is to talk about how viewing things in your life, especially these sort of big, multifaceted projects, in terms of failure and success, is itself fundamentally kind of messed up. If I was right about one thing in my old win states video, it's this. The power of win states is the power to shape player interaction with the system and drive them in specific directions you want to see the player go. But this play shaping ability comes at a cost. Win states are so powerful when it comes to driving player motivation that any and all mechanics tend to be viewed through that lens. So tertiary and optional stuff becomes at best a distraction and at worst a detrimental activity that has no value. Goals, win states, whatever you want to call them, are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they can provide motivation, something to strive for, a direction to orient your decision-making around, a vision you can pull strength from in weaker moments, or inspire you to continue when all seems lost. They can be incredibly useful in getting you to push yourself, to demand more and better from the things you do. Far be it from me to say that people having goals they set for themselves are a bad thing. But just as easily they can twist the way you think about every aspect of the things you do in terms of whether it pushes you towards or away from some imagined future.
Must continue moving in ways that lead to dying with you.
And they can dominate the way you look at things that are far more complicated than a simple success or failure while insisting you apply that lens to them. And I think my desire for this show to be the thing it's never going to be has blinded me to what it is. For one, it's utterly my own. I am not at the whims of sponsors or even my audience, really. Jim Sterling, for example, has oft lamented that they need to go negative in their coverage because that's what sells. The rare positive episode is an indulgence because people flock to sardonic negativity in a way they don't to effusive praise. But because this isn't my job, I can cover what I want, how I want, viewership be damned. If I want a show that has a ton of positive things said about a bunch of obscure, janky indie games, I can do that without worrying I'm taking a hit to my income. If I want to spend a whole 20-minute episode breaking down the themes and ideas of one weird game few people have even heard of, I can do that too. If I want to say popular thing bad, I could do that. I'm not driven by what's going to hit, I'm driven by what interests me, what I'm passionate about. And that's a freedom that not a lot of people doing this stuff professionally can really say. And maybe I could even start exercising that power to do whatever I want more. I've been trapped in this box of game analysis for so long, hoping desperately to make this whole channel work with that branding, but I'd love to be able to talk about movies or books or theme parks, or maybe branch out into shorter experimental videos. Did you know I released a riff of a Universal Studios promotional video to my patrons this month? It's cringy and bad because it's something new I've never done before and I'm not good at it yet, and I'm terrified to release it publicly, but maybe I should. Maybe that's how you grow. I also don't have to worry about burnout the way other creators do. I'm not obligated to feed the black hole of the algorithm that hungers ever more for content. You may have noticed that the past few months have been a little Spartan in terms of videos. That's because I've been working on a lot of stuff, but not able to release any of it yet. And also just working on myself, for obvious reasons. And it's a major accomplishment just to stick to something this long. The act of enduring itself gives the show meaning. And it's given me so much in return. Thanks to this show, I got invited to fly out to Sweden for the Gotland Games Conference and give a speech about how the platforms we operate games on shape the forms they take. It was a really cool experience I'm super grateful for, and I'd never have gotten to do that without this weird little YouTube show I do. Without the show, I wouldn't have met my friends at the Spoiler Warning crew, and by proxy, about 2/3 of my online social circle. A lot of people I respect have seen my work, from game academics to game creators to fellow critics and video producers. And I've heard from at least a few people that said I helped inspire them to get into game development, game studies, or video production. And I genuinely, sincerely think that that's amazing. That there are any creators of any kind or size out there working even in part because I made a silly internet show about my inner thoughts on video games is utterly humbling, and I am grateful to have been a small part in some people's lives. My point is, I don't think Errant Signal is a failure just because it didn't turn into this thing I envisioned as a naive 26-year-old kid who had stars in his eyes. And honestly, to keep pace with current trends, going full-time at this point probably means moving my 36-year-old ass, my wife, and my dogs into a hype house with some 18-year-old TikTok stars, which would be hilarious, but I don't really want that. What I want now is to keep this thing going, but not necessarily growing. I want it to be what it's going to be, whatever that is. I'm sick of worrying about success that likely will never come. And if there's a general lesson to be learned in this meandering, navel-gazing 10-year anniversary video, it's this. Goals and win states can be powerful motivators and can push us to do great things. But games treat win states as absolutes because they're formal systems that struggle with subjectivity and nuance and train us to do the same. And sometimes it's worth stepping back and reevaluating whether the goal you're chasing is viable or even something you still want, especially if chasing it has caused you to overlook the richness of a thing that's right in front of you. This show has weathered 10 long years. Good times, bad times, and in between. Here's to another decade of self-deprecation, toiling in relative obscurity, video game criticism, and maybe some other weird fun stuff too. Thank you to anyone who has watched any of this over the past decade. And here's to the next 10 years. There's plenty more where this came from. Unfortunately or not.